Welcome back to another Tempo Storm Meta Snapshot breakdown. With some pretty sizable nerfs for both Wild and Standard in the recent balance patch, it's only natural to see some crazy changes to our tier list. For example, a newcomer to the top tiers has taken the lead in Tier 1, and other mainstays have found brand new placements on the list. As always, before we dive into the first tier, we want to invite you to check out the rest of the report over at tempostorm.com for a more comprehensive look at the standard meta. Now let's jump right in. Leading off Tier 1 is Undead Priest. Previously clocking in at Tier 3, this newer archetype seems very well situated to continue dominating the competitive ladder. Making use of both Shadow Priest and Undead synergies, this archetype can be very fast out of the gate, pressuring opponents before they come online. With a plethora of cheap minions, shadow cards, and undead payoffs, the deck has a great matchup chart, maintaining a 50% win rate in its very worst matchups. And its best matchups are pretty consistent to boot, with its most notable ones being against Pure Paladin and Quest Druid. Speaking of other Tier 1 decks, the second archetype making an appearance in this tier is Frost Death Knight. You may remember this deck claiming the top spot in the last Meta Snapshot, but thanks to the Construct Quarter nerf, the archetype took a small hit. But this deck remains quite consistent, which means it still deserves the top tier. The archetype was refined prior to the patch, leaving very little room for change despite the nerfs. It still has a solid matchup spread, performing well against most Tier 1 and 2 decks. Its best performing matchups are against Unholy Death Knight and Pure Paladin, as they can't deal with your early aggression. But you may find yourself struggling with Quest Druid due to the deck's survivability. The last deck that we're looking at in Tier 1 is the previously mentioned Unholy Death Knight. While it may be in the shadow of Frost Death Knight, the list is still performing exceptionally well at all ranks. Despite the nerf to its location, Unholy Death Knight still excels at building sticky boards pressuring down opponents. With Unholy Death Knight, you'll find yourself performing best against Quest Druid and Pure Paladin, as you can usually stick durable boards to continually pressure them down. In terms of bad matchups, you'll find yourself struggling against the faster Frost Death Knight, as they will often do what you do, but better. And that wraps up our look at Tier 1. As always, we want to briefly take a look at the top decks in the second tier that are making waves in the meta. Before we do, a quick reminder that you can view the full report over at tempostorm.com for a more in-depth analysis on the other decks from the meta report. Now let's take a look at Miracle Rogue. Despite continued nerfs, Miracle Rogue still seems to have a presence in the meta, partly due to Frost Death Knight's nerf. The playstyle of Miracle Rogue remains the same, as do its matchups. You'll find yourself thriving against greedier decks like Quest Druid or Imp Warlock, both of which struggle to deal with tall threats. But faster, more aggressive archetypes such as Undead Priest and Frost Death Knight will take advantage of your lack of removal and healing. Quest Druid is the talk of the town, as it takes Tier 2 in its debut on the Meta Snapshot. This deck was born in hopes of countering Frost Death Knight, and despite the nerfs to the latter archetype, the former remains a threat on ladder. Thanks to the massive armor gain the deck has access to, you'll notice yourself stalling out a lot of aggressive decks, giving you a chance to find your combo. This deck shares similarities with Ramp Druid, as you'll often be focused on surviving till your combo. The last deck that we'll be taking a look at in today's Meta Snapshot breakdown is Pure Paladin. Despite its relatively linear playstyle, Pure Paladin has been making waves in the meta. With newer cards such as Goldwing and the Purator, Pure Paladin's rise was only a matter of time. The deck can hold on to board with a death grip, making it hard for most classes to regain tempo. Pure Paladin is often called the Netflix deck, as your decisions are mostly linear, meaning it's a great choice for multitaskers. If you decide to pick up Uther's best deck, you'll find yourself beating Quest Druid and decks like it pretty consistently. On the other hand, if your local meta is swarmed by Death Knights, we suggest trying something else. And that concludes the Meta Snapshot breakdown. Players are still experimenting and refining decks, and only time will tell where the meta ends up. If you enjoyed this look at the standard Hearthstone Meta Snapshot, we welcome you to subscribe to the channel to be kept up to date with all of our Hearthstone content. Until next time.